Right, we're here. This week I'm going to start with the exhaust on Kaiser II. This is the W111 Mercedes Coupe project that we've been building. It's got a Chevy LS3 in it, and the last couple of weeks we've been doing the exhaust system on it, which is almost done. James is just finishing the last bit. He's been doing the crossover pipe, or link pipe, whatever you want to call it, and then it's just got to come off, have some sections heat wrapped. Where it goes close is a bit close to the steering column, and then where it comes up over the axle, we're going to heat wrap that just to keep some of the heat away from the diff and the airbags on the back. But yeah, pretty much there, 2.5-inch stainless all the way through. We've just got 2 boxes on the back here. I tend to find that these LSs aren't that loud anyway, especially on a cruise, so I think, Ben, you want a bit of a fruity note there, don't you? So it shouldn't be too bad. Stratos, so we haven't seen much going on with this recently, but we're back on with this at the minute, and tackling a few different areas on it. The exhaust, I think the last time we were really doing anything with this, we had Simpson do the exhaust system on it. So moving on from that, that's then allowed us to complete all of the wiring and the lower drive shaft positioning, or the bearing carrier for that. So we're just on with designing the bearing carrier that will hold that shaft. Just to sort of explain that a bit more, it's an MR2 turbo gearbox, which is one of the stronger transverse front-wheel drive gearboxes out there. And because of that, we've got an MR2 intermediate shaft, but of course it's an Alpha V6, so we need to make a mounting, which we're gonna have under here, which will hold the bearing to carry that shaft there. The actual shafts between the ends, between the flanges and the wheels, we've already had made. They're custom-made shafts. So it's ready to go apart from that bearing. So we're just doing the housing for that now. We've done a heat shield to sit above the manifold just to keep some of the heat away from the intake. Try and help the charge temperatures as much as we can. And at the moment we're just stripping apart the oil filter housing. It's one of the few parts we didn't refurbish when we built the engine, so we're just stripping that apart, bead blasting the aluminium housing, replating the steel parts, and then putting all that back together again. The other thing we've been doing on this is, a couple of days ago, we had the guys from A2P2 here to do some 3D scanning work for us. Now these are the guys we generally go to when we've got 3D scan and CAD modelling from that scan data to do. On this, it was the steering column shroud. So it's got a Fiat X19 steering column, and it's got a Fiat X19 column shroud, but because we're using the dash, just a sweeping curved dash, rather than having the instrument binnacle that these Stratuses tended to have normally, we need to extend that shroud forward. And it made sense to actually scan the existing lower shroud, which extends all the way to the dash. The upper shroud is quite short. So we're scanning the lower shroud so that we can make an extension piece for that upper shroud, which will be 3D printed, and then will form basically a complete shroud that goes all the way to the dash, which will then probably flock or upholster. So they've been doing that, and then while those guys were here, the other job they were doing for us was scanning the rear end of Utah, the Mark II Jag. Last week we saw that got as far as paint. So we're kind of looking forward now to some of the rebuild details that we've not already planned. And on the rear, the lamp bezels, we knew what we were going to do there, but the next steps were to get it 3D scanned so we could get the parts machined. So what we've done on the shell is we've got a round recess in that rear quarter panel, and we've got a round lamp that we've already chosen to go in there. And what we've done is scan the rear end of the car, so we can build a CAD model of the exact shape, and then there will be a machined part made from that model, which sits into the sort of cylindrical recess, is held in by the light, but then comes out to the sort of body line and has a return flange, a shaped bezel, if you like, that sits around that light and actually follows the shape profile of the car. So what they'll be doing, A2P2 have done the scan, they're going to do the CAD model, we'll then 3D print a trial, test it, if it fits, great. If it's not perfect, we'll have another tweak until we're happy with it, and then once we're happy with that, we'll get them machined in brass and chrome them, and that'll be the finished part, which gives us a nice chrome bezel around the rear lights. Other stuff on Utah, which actually ties in quite well with 3D printing as well. This is the front, and we've been waiting for the brake setup to arrive, which was supplied to us by Fosway Performance. It basically comprises a pair of billet alloy 6-piston calipers, and the discs I think are just over 300mm, I can't remember the exact diameter, 305mm I think. But you may remember from previous ones or the Utah episodes, we'd done our own steering arms to combat various issues that arise with geometry when you do a rack and pinion conversion on it. And we were holding fire on machining those in steel because we wanted to check the clearance on the brake calipers, because the steering arms sit right next to the brake calipers. And funnily enough, it was a wise move to hold fire because there was a clearance issue. So we've done a slight redesign on those steering arms to clear the brake caliper and the caliper bracket. We can still keep the actual mounting for the track rod end in the same place, so it won't affect the geometry. It was just sculpting out the arm a little bit to clear the caliper bracket. So now we're happy with that. Those can go off for machining. The rack mounts also can be machined. So we'll have all the machined parts then to get this front end completely built, which will coincide, hopefully, quite nicely with the shell finishing paint. All right, so on that subject, shall we go through to the other side? The dark side. Right, have a little mosey along here. So Stu's still on with the Camaro, getting on really well with the dry build on that. We're just working on some details of panel shuts effectively. So the wing line at the minute is not right on that side. I needed a bit of tweaking this side as well to get the top of the wing the way it lines up with the door, which is actually quite counterintuitive. It doesn't actually line up with the door. To get the stainless mouldings to line up, the wing has to stop below the door, which is an interesting detail on these. But in terms of the fitting up of everything, that's all looking good. We've sort of got a big job list to go through on the dry build on this, which we're pretty much getting there now. I think last week we didn't have this tinware in, although I think Jamie did shoot some footage of it later. So that we wanted to get that back all in there again to absolutely check the final fit of everything. The radiator is a good example. We've made a fabricated steel mock-up of the radiator, which we can use to make all the bracketry, test all the clearances, and then that will be used as a pattern for the aluminium radiator that gets fabricated. And what we've done, I'll explain a few of these details. In the front here, you see the two big holes. They will be a recess eventually where there's a cap on each side. That side is going to be the coolant fill cap, and that's built into that side of the radiator. And what we're doing is when the radiator's built, we're going to have an integrated tank on the near side of the radiator, this side, which will be the power steering fluid reservoir, and this will be the power steering fill point. So you've got symmetrical caps, coolant that side, power steering fluid this side. And then another detail we've done, we've got the brake master cylinder sits under here with a billet machined reservoir that comes up through here with the twin caps on it. And then what we're doing is we've got exactly the same billet reservoir that side, which will be the screen wash fill point, which will go through the inner wing to a bigger tank underneath. But from the engine bay, all you see is two matching billet anodised tanks in there. And then one of the sort of finishing detail on here will be that we're going to do some fabricated or machined coil pack covers that will sit in the remaining gaps here. But hopefully, you know, with a fair amount of planning, we're going to have an engine bay that looks really, really tidy and minimal, but still reasonably easy to work on, because the coil pack covers will be removable. This piece in the centre here is not particularly difficult to remove. There's 4 bolts under the back there, you reach under to do those, and then on the flange here, I think there's 4 bolts each side, undo those, and that just lifts out. So it's not too bad from the mechanical serviceability point of view. So that's that. Chevette. We've been carrying on with the rot repair. So I think Scott had just done this section here last week. He did a little bit of repair on the headlamps around that side, and on the back of the inner wing where the reinforcing box is. There's a reinforcer box which is missing from this side at the minute. On that side it wasn't rotten, but we decided to take it off so we could clean up any surface rust inside it, protect it with some epoxy primer, and then weld it back on. There was a little bit of rot in this corner, the other side, to repair, which has been done. And at the moment he's working on this sill. So that sill is actually not going to be replaced. It's just a little repair at the front, which we've done. This side we're replacing the whole outer sill, which is an available panel. And then all the inner structure we're repairing. So Scott's been working on this reinforcer panel, which is essentially the lower section of the inner quarter panel here, which forms a reinforcer that drops down and ties into where the outer sill meets the inner. And then a whole section of inner sill here, which is just in the process of making at the moment. So once we've done that, inner in, reinforcer in, and then the new outer sill will go on. And then there'll be a little bit of rust repair to do on this corner. The new sill kind of comes around here, so it includes that, but we'll have a bit to do on the pillar there, and then just this corner section here. That'll be more or less the last of the rust repair. And then we start to move on to the more exciting fabrication. And on that sort of front, I've been measuring up to start looking at the location for the boxes that will hold the trailing arms for the axle. So that was really a case of establishing the axle centre line fore and aft and marking that out. So I've marked that out in various places on the shell and on the jig. The beauty of having this shell on a jig like this and levelled is you can then use a self-levelling laser to pick up all these lines and throw them across the whole car to mark the other side. We then established the axle centre line at ride height vertically, and I've marked that out on the shell as well. And from that information and the length of the links, the separation between the link mounting points and the axle centre lines, we've established a height for the top of the link box at the front, the height of the link box at the back of the box, and the fore and aft front point. So we're in the process of then marking out where we're going to cut to put those link boxes in. But there will be a reasonable amount of metalwork cut out as well, because the way these were originally, they've got the spring pans underneath, which we don't need anymore. The structural section that runs up there is going to be digging into the space where we want to put our link box. So we're going to be removing quite a lot. We also need to make more space for the diff to get a bit more axle travel. So the chances are we're going to cut out a good chunk of this over axle area, refabricate that, modify those chassis rail box sections there and tie them into our new link box housings. We'll also be tying this into where the main hoop cage feet come down, and then we'll also introduce a cross member as well to strengthen the shell crossways. So that will probably be next week's progress. We'll be making a start on all of this fabrication work back here, because really what we want to do is get the axle location and axle provision work done. Then we can get the cage in and tie the cage into that structure. Then with the cage in, we'll look at the seat mounts, because this cage dictates or has an influence on the clearance for the seats. So the cage in, seats will go in, do the seat mounting rails, then we can look at pedal position, steering column position, and then sort of start working through. We've also got we've made a start on stripping the engine down, so we're going to have just a dummy block and head. We've got the ancillary parts for that, dry sump pan, dry sump pump, and throttle bodies and various bolt-on ancillaries that affect the physical size of it. We've got the bell housing to make that up to the quaif, so another area of progress is likely to be getting all that bolted up together and slung into place, so we can then look at what fabrication we're going to have to do on the tunnel and in the engine bay. I'm actually hoping not much in the tunnel, because it's an auto. This was an auto, which means it's got a really big tunnel anyway, so I'm thinking we won't have to do a lot of work in the tunnel, which would be good. If you follow me this way, shut that. So the Jensen, which you were introduced to last week, we're just on the strip down. So we've been taking everything out the interior, all of the trims, lots and lots of seized screws and sheared bolts, and we're just working towards being able to separate the body from the chassis. So as I talked about last time, the chassis is basically a basic pair of tubes and then a lot of flat sheet metalwork in between. And the front end, you've got these two individual inner wing panels, then these sort of flank panels here, which are separate, and then the whole of the rest of it is one piece. So the scuttle, up the screen pillars, the roof, and all the quarter and around the back end, that's all one fiberglass piece. Now looking at it, I can see that there's a metal frame that runs around the rear window apertures, around the door aperture, and includes like a sort of step sill here. And I suspect they've done that so that it's got a little bit more stiffness to it, that section, when it's removed, so that it's not this whole front section just hanging off the C-pillars. So what we're going to try and do is separate it, including that frame, and bring it up with that frame attached, because that frame separates from the main chassis along the bottom of here. This plate in the back here ties it into the main chassis there. So it looks not too horrific to separate the rear fiberglass tub with that metal body frame side as part of it. Rich is just working on the heater box at the minute, which is one of the more awkward areas where the chassis is bonded to the body, because the heater box is kind of bonded into that orifice, if you like, in the body there. So the next step really at the moment is identifying where all the locations are in terms of the fasteners between the body and the chassis, probably shearing lots of them off and having to drill lots of them out. Then chiseling our way through what is basically just a fossilised, the sealer that was originally bonding the two is just like really crispy now, which will probably help us because I think it'll chisel out reasonably easily, although Rich is probably going to beg to differ on that one. So yeah, working towards body off, and then we can already see that the chassis is, not surprisingly, fairly rough. We'll sort of reveal more of that when the body's off. There's also some accident damage. That on that side, I can see some interesting repair to the fiberglass on the inside of the quarter there. I would guess has been bashed in, cracked in various places, and then it's sort of been pushed out, fiberglassed and filled over. And there's a little bit on the back there as well. It looks like the bumper's been punched through the back panel, but it's actually above where the bumper is. So something at some stage has been punched in through the back there, and then the repair is involved essentially just filling the punched in bit with filler. But it doesn't look, I'm still reasonably hopeful for the condition of the body being good enough to use. The chassis, we'll find out, and hopefully, hey, look at that, heater box coming out. That was a nicely timed bit of progress. It's not coming out, but it's separate from the body, so that's good. So yeah, hopefully next week we'll have the body off the chassis and we'll know a bit more about the condition of the chassis. We'll leave it at that for the minute. Actually, no, we won't. What I am going to mention is the last thing. Perhaps not that surprisingly, one of the most commented things upon after the last video was the engine choice. We're talking about the fact we were going to do a Chevy LT or LS engine in it, and there was a lot of people saying, well, you should be putting a Mopar engine in. I get it. We talked about the same thing. It was originally a Mopar engine, and the idea of putting a Hellcat in it does seem quite appealing. But there are some pretty significant factors that count against it. When you just sort of take any brand allegiance out of the equation and just take it on the real life factors that actually affect, cost or performance, there's not a lot of argument for using a Mopar engine in it. Point one is, in the UK, there is an official importer for Chevy Performance, Partswell Performance in Cannock. There's also an official importer for Ford Performance, US stuff, Power Torque, which means for the Chevy stuff, we can easily get it. It's in stock in the UK. All of the parts, or the vast majority of them, are in stock in the UK. So there's not really much complication in back and forth, shipping costs from the US, duty, all the rest of it. It's a pick up the phone and order what we want. The other thing is the Hellcat is iron block and the LS is all alloy. If you go online, you'll probably find a mysterious lack of information about the weight of the Hellcat. But essentially, the difference in weight between a supercharged LS and a Hellcat is more or less the weight of a grown human. And anybody who doesn't notice the handling differences in a car with a passenger versus without, to be honest, shouldn't call themselves a driver. So that's a factor as well, that wanting to not add an excessive amount of weight in it. Even though they did have a big iron block V8 originally, that's no reason to not want to try and minimise the weight. And the other reason is just the vast array of accessories that are available. So particularly things like the ancillary drive systems that are available for the LS in various formats, with compressors and pumps mounted in different places, and various other parts. The parts supply aftermarket for the LS conversion parts is just so vast. And although we'd be perfectly capable of engineering those things to work with a Hellcat, it just isn't that cost effective. And you start thinking, well, why are you putting yourself through this trauma of struggling to get an engine over here, then having to engineer parts for it to essentially have something that's heavier, admittedly more powerful, but we don't need that much power in this. For me, the argument is purely one of the sort of nostalgia and the idea that you're putting the same brand of engine in it that was in there originally. But ultimately, they probably just chose that engine because it was available at the time as well. So for us, the Chevy definitely makes the most sense on this one. Although I won't argue with the sound that verbally the word Hellcat in a Jensen sounds amazing. Anyway, we'll leave it at that, and we'll catch up again next week.